Dubai's glittering skyline reflected the harsh midday sun as Mark Daniels, a seasoned police chief, drove his sleek black SUV into his upscale neighborhood. Mark had served as the chief of police for Dubai's bustling metropolitan precinct for over a decade. Despite his high-ranking position, he preferred to keep a low profile. In his community, he was just another resident living a quiet life with his wife and teenage daughter. But before we dive into what happens next, I'd love to know, where are you tuning in from today? Drop a comment below and please like the video. Thank you. The neighborhood, managed by a strict homeowners association, HOA, was known for its pristine lawns, uniform architectural designs, and an obsession with rules. Over the years, Mark had heard grumbles from his neighbors about the HOA's heavy-handed approach. Fines for trivial issues like a single weed in the garden or slightly mismatched paint were common. However, Mark had always paid his dues on time and avoided conflict, until today. As he approached his driveway, Mark noticed two vehicles, a silver sedan and a white pickup truck, blocking his entrance. Both cars bore the unmistakable decals of the HOA enforcement team, humorously nicknamed HOA cops by the residents. Three men in navy uniforms stood near the vehicles, chatting loudly. Mark rolled down his window. "Excuse me," he said, his calm voice cutting through the chatter. "Why are you blocking my driveway?" One of the men, a burly individual with a clipboard, turned to him with a smug grin. "You're in violation of HOA policy," he announced. "We've issued multiple notices about your unpaid fine." Mark frowned. "What fine? I've never received any notice." The man tapped his clipboard theatrically. "A $79 fine for failing to replace a burnt-out bulb in your front yard lantern. Since you've ignored our reminders, we've escalated the matter." Mark's jaw tightened. "First of all, I haven't ignored anything because I wasn't notified. Second, you're blocking my driveway and preventing me from accessing my property. That's not how you handle a fine." The burly man chuckled condescendingly. "That's how we handle residents who think they're above the rules." The two other HOA officers snickered. Mark, who had dealt with hardened criminals and dangerous situations throughout his career, felt his patience thinning. He parked his SUV on the side of the street and stepped out. Despite his casual attire, his commanding presence was impossible to ignore. "Move the vehicles," Mark said firmly. The burly man folded his arms. "Not until you pay the fine." Mark stared at him for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then, he pulled out his phone and made a call. "Lieutenant Khalid," he said when the line connected. "I need a patrol unit at my address. We've got a situation with unauthorized vehicles obstructing private property." The burly man's confidence wavered as he overheard the conversation. "Hey now," he began, attempting to sound reasonable. "There's no need to involve the police. We're just enforcing HOA rules." Mark raised an eyebrow. "You're blocking access to my property over a $79 fine. That's harassment and unlawful obstruction. I suggest you move your vehicles before this escalates." Before the HOA officers could respond, a sleek Dubai police patrol car pulled up. Two uniformed officers stepped out, their presence radiating authority. Lieutenant Khalid, a tall man with sharp features, approached Mark. "Chief Daniels," he greeted with a respectful nod. "What's the issue?" Mark gestured toward the blocked driveway. "These gentlemen from the HOA have decided to block my driveway over a minor fine. They refuse to move their vehicles." Khalid's eyes narrowed as he turned to the HOA officers. "Blocking private property is a serious matter in Dubai. Remove your vehicles immediately." The burly man stammered, his earlier bravado completely gone. "We were just following protocol," Khalid cut him off. "Your protocol doesn't override the law. Move your vehicles now or I'll have them towed." The HOA officers scrambled to comply, their faces pale. Once the driveway was clear, Mark turned to Khalid. "Thank you, Lieutenant. I'll handle the rest." Khalid nodded and left with his officers. Mark faced the HOA team, his expression icy. "Now let's talk about that fine." The burly man shifted uncomfortably. "Look, this was a misunderstanding." Mark held up a hand. "Enough. I've been a resident here for years and have always complied with HOA rules. But today, you crossed the line. Blocking a resident's driveway over a trivial matter is not just unprofessional, it's unacceptable. The other two officers remained silent, clearly intimidated. Mark continued, "You've abused your authority, and it ends now. I'll be filing a formal complaint with the HOA board. If I find out this behavior is part of a larger pattern, I'll ensure it's dealt with at the highest level." The HOA board. If I find out this behavior is part of a larger pattern, I'll ensure it's dealt with at the highest level. The burly man nodded meekly. "Understood, sir." Mark dismissed them with a sharp gesture, and they hurried to their vehicles. As they drove away, Mark finally entered his home, greeted by his wife and daughter. He explained the ordeal to them, shaking his head in disbelief. The following week, Mark attended the HOA board meeting, armed with evidence of the incident. His calm yet forceful presentation left the board members visibly uncomfortable. By the end of the meeting, the head of the HOA issued a public apology to Mark and announced stricter guidelines for the enforcement team to prevent similar incidents. Though the matter was resolved, Mark's actions had a ripple effect. His neighbors, inspired by his stand, began pushing back against the HOA's excessive fines and overreach. Over time, the community found a balance between maintaining high standards and treating residents with respect. For Mark, the incident was a reminder that leadership wasn't just about rank or title. It was about standing up for what's right, no matter how small the issue. In a city as grand as Dubai, even the smallest victories could have a profound impact. Mark's stand against the HOA's overreach did not end with the meeting. Word of his confrontation spread quickly through the neighborhood. Residents began approaching him with their own stories of unjust fines, intimidating tactics, and a lack of accountability from the HOA. It became clear that this was not an isolated incident, but part of a systemic problem. One evening, Mark hosted a meeting at his home. His spacious living room, with its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view of the Dubai skyline, was filled with neighbors eager to share their grievances. An elderly couple spoke about being fined for having improperly trimmed hedges, despite hiring the HOA's recommended landscaper. A single mother recounted how she had been threatened with legal action over a minor late fee. Mark listened attentively, taking notes and promising to address their concerns. His wife, Maria, a lawyer with expertise in property law, suggested they form a residents' committee to challenge the HOA's practices. The idea was met with enthusiastic support, and by the end of the evening, a plan was in motion. The committee, led by Mark and Maria, began gathering evidence and legal documentation. They discovered several irregularities in the HOA's operations, including exorbitant administrative fees, unapproved expenditures, and questionable enforcement practices. It became evident that a small group within the HOA board was profiting from the fines and penalties imposed on residents. Maria, with her legal acumen, drafted a formal complaint to Dubai's real estate regulatory agency, ARERA, which oversees homeowners associations. The complaint was comprehensive, detailing years of financial mismanagement and abusive practices. With Mark's connections in law enforcement, they ensured the case received the attention it deserved. Meanwhile, the HOA board tried to push back. The same burly enforcement officer who had blocked Mark's driveway began spreading rumors about him, claiming he was using his position as police chief to bully the HOA. Mark, ever composed, ignored the slander and focused on the facts. Weeks later, RERA initiated an investigation. Auditors arrived unannounced at the HOA's office, poring over records and interviewing staff. The findings were damning: misuse of funds, fraudulent fines, and a lack of transparency in decision-making. The HOA board members implicated in the scheme were forced to resign, and some faced legal charges for embezzlement. In the aftermath, a new HOA board was elected, with a strong emphasis on fairness and accountability. Mark declined the nomination to serve on the board, but offered his continued support to ensure the changes were implemented. His wife, Maria, agreed to serve as a legal advisor, ensuring the new board operated within the bounds of the law. The neighborhood underwent a transformation. Residents who had previously felt powerless now had a voice in how their community was managed. The enforcement team was disbanded and replaced with a professional property management company. Fines were issued only when absolutely necessary, and all decisions were made transparently. Mark's actions earned him immense respect within the community. Neighbors would often stop him during his evening walks to thank him for standing up against the HOA's abuse. Despite his busy schedule, he always made time to listen and offer advice. One day, Mark received an unexpected visitor. The burly former enforcement officer, who had been at the center of the driveway incident, arrived at his doorstep. He looked nervous, but determined. "Chief Daniels," he began, avoiding eye contact. "I came to apologize. I was wrong to treat you and others the way I did. I let the power get to my head." Mark studied him for a moment before nodding. "Acknowledging your mistakes is the first step toward making amends. What are you doing now?" "I've started working as a security guard," the man admitted. "It's been humbling." Mark extended his hand. "Everyone deserves a chance to change. Do better moving forward." The man shook his hand, visibly relieved. As he left, Mark felt a sense of closure. The ordeal had been challenging, but it had brought about meaningful change, not just for his neighborhood, but for the people involved. Life in the community settled into a peaceful rhythm. Mark continued his work as police chief, but now he carried an additional title in the eyes of his neighbors: a leader who stood up for justice, no matter how big or small the battle. In the glittering city of Dubai, his story became a quiet testament to the power of integrity and the importance of fighting for what's right.